right, in structuring out your scenes and kind of stretching out that outline into more detail. So you have your high level purpose for each, we'll say segment or chapter, however you want to do this. Then you want to look at that particular scene. Okay, so that's how I approach it. Each chapter is kind of a scene. There may be more than one scene in that particular chapter, just depends on how I decide that I want to structure it. But for the most part, each chapter is usually its own individual scene. So you have to think of each scene as kind of like just a mini plot. So you're looking at a goal, a conflict, and a disaster, and that's how your chapter should progress for the most part. And most scenes, when you break them down, they are essentially a cause and effect. Something happens, which triggers something else to happen, which might then in turn cause something else to happen. And this back and forth effect is a good way of writing, and the readers really pick up on it. It just seems very natural, because that makes sense to us. Everything has a cause and an effect, or if you want to look at it as a stimulus and response. So like, let's say, so character 1 takes an action, which stimulates character 2 to respond, which in turn stimulates character 1 to then make a response to that. It's a cycle that is continuous throughout the story. When you're talking about a particular scene, it's just on a much smaller level and may not have as high a consequence as your overall story arc and your main, goal, conflict, and disaster. A few tips whenever you're reviewing your scenes and you're kind of laying them out and thinking, what would my character's response be to this stimulus? Or how would my character react to this? It's something really to think about, and you should really step into the shoes of that character and determine, what are they going to do in this situation? How are they going to act? You want to make sure that your character doesn't act out of character. I've seen a lot of lazy writing in some TV shows that are very beloved characters, and they change things and make them almost to where I get confused, because that character would never have made that choice. But because they want the plot to go in that direction, they are making the character choose that choice, which doesn't make sense to me because it's not true to the character's goals, the character's morals. Sometimes I question, there's no way that character would have made that choice. And that to me seems, just glaringly lazy writing, because you want to go in a certain direction, either because that's what your producers want to do, or you're doing some sort of fan service, which is really annoying. A few tips in planning and revising scenes for maximum effect. Don't grab the first idea that comes to mind. It's usually the most predictable, and the reader will find it boring. Since I'm a writer, I have this wonderful superpower that anytime I watch a TV show or a movie, I can usually see what's happening about 10 miles down the road. I can see it coming. And it usually is because either it's the simplest choice, it's the predictable option, usually, or it's the kind of twisty option, like if I was doing it, my reader would think this was going to happen, but then I'd actually do this. And because I have that mentality that I'm thinking about that, I usually see it. So unfortunately, if you're going to be a writer, you're going to ruin a lot of endings for a lot of shows that you might watch on TV, or even books for that matter. Make sure your antagonist has a goal. We talked about that in early development. You need to invest in your antagonist equally that you do in your protagonist. Make sure you're developing your villain of the story. Remembering that people are not always rational. So when your characters make choices, especially if it's in the heat of the moment, they might make bad choices. People make bad choices all the time. It's okay for your character to make bad choices. That's normal. That's normal human behavior, is to make irrational choices. So don't think that everything in your book has to be rationalized or make sense. It does not. Because there's a lot of, I look at a lot of people in the world and I go, that does not make any sense. Or, they say something that doesn't make any sense. So people are not rational. So remember that when you're writing characters, make them realistic. Always be ready to raise the stakes. There's this ongoing, I guess, joke that, us as writers like to torture our characters. And that to a certain extent is true. You have to be willing to do those things to make a story interesting. I know that I wrote an entire book one time and I got to the end and realized that it was supposed to be a very tragic ending. I had always intended it to be that way. I got to the end and I was like, there are way too many people that are alive. How did so many people survive this? I had to go back during my editing phases and say, okay, half of these characters need to die. And so that was raising the stakes because that's what I wanted. I wanted the end to be this heart-wrenching, tragic moment. And if I didn't sacrifice those characters during the story, it just didn't pan out quite as I expected in the end. So you have to be willing to take those risks. Maybe you have a character that you love, but based on the story, they gotta go, or something bad has to happen to them in order to push their character development forward. So something else to think about. This kind of goes hand in hand with all of that. Never let the characters relax or feel comfortable. There should always be a tension there. Never let the story get relaxed. There should always be something going on. And you should never give your characters a break. They should always be running around like crazy trying to achieve their goal. So that will help you keep that cause and effect kind of scene structure in line if you're always having some sort of a response to a stimulus. So some things to think about whenever you are outlining your chapters.